Thank you, Chair, members of the committee. My name is Charlie Zelli. I'm Chair of the Metropolitan Council, and I'm joined by Nick Thompson, who's the Deputy General Manager for Capital Projects. And it's my honor to appear before you. I'll certainly be willing to answer questions, but I have kind of an opening comments. I see Senator Dibble's left the room, but I would just like to open by saying that I wish Met Council was perfect. Sadly, we are not. We are learning every day, and we certainly have learned a lot through the course of this project and the course of the reviews by the legislative auditor. We actually appreciate the feedback and from others as well. And I believe that we are making improvements, not just on the ongoing project management, but some of the larger kind of structural issues that have been described here. Just the need for additional improvements in documentation. We do have confidence in much of our documentation that we'll be able to deploy later in additional settlements with the contractors. But some of the larger initiatives that have been taken over the past 6 months is adopting a transit advancement policy. This is before we engage or start any new phase of any large transitway project, that we will have a full assessment of risks, full assessment of what we're entering. There's clear evidence that in these large mega projects, thinking slowly and methodically and understanding where responsibilities are, where financial risks are laid in is much better early on. And that allows for smoother deployment later. And so we have a matter of policy and a practice that we've refined about entering transitway projects. I think Ms. Farmer referred to a new organizational structure. We are developing a new division as part of Met Transit. Met Transit is operations, but then there's Met Transit infrastructure project management. This isn't just one project. We have multiple projects, including arterial bus rapid transit. And, although all of those others that we've done in the past have worked well, we know that understanding our contracts, understanding what resources are required to support project teams, and actually sharing best practice, particularly when it comes to developing appropriate contracts, and is essential. And I think actually organizationally having a division that is really project management based, working with our funding partners is really important. The other is just other best practices that we've incorporated in projects already. The Gold Line under construction, and now as we moving forward with others like the Blue Line, there's a number of practices that we've already put into place. There's been a lot of conversation about the independent cost estimators. It's in fact an issue that we've really wrestled with. There is advantages of having your design engineer be the independent cost estimator because they're so familiar with the engineering and the design of the project. But there's clearly a conflict, and we have found, and with the advice of MnDOT in their peer review, that an independent cost estimator is better, that they are independent from the engineer of record, and certainly independent from the contractor. They should not be independent from the owner. They're our advisor. And as we've discussed here, they should be actually very close and they should be trusted. We did have issues with the ICE in the past, working really closely with them to improve, and they did. Such things as what was cited by the legislative auditor about co-location with freight rail. That actually does matter and affects the cost. Site, field conditions matters. Sometimes it was so simple as scope, like how many of a certain unit. This is arithmetic. We had issues that we worked through. Now we have another independent cost estimator, and we find this process to be much better, and I think continuing to meet improvements. With that, I want to just take a quick pause and thank the legislature for the results of the past legislative session. Frankly, having funding to anticipate that we will be able to fund future projects and more importantly, our future operations for our robust transit network is really critical. So I appreciate very much that we have sustainable funding, but more importantly, that we are now having greater clarity about the roles and responsibilities that Met Council has and what would really inure to our funding partners, primarily counties. There's no question that the Met Council sponsors and is the portal for federal funding, but we will cover all future operations and long-term capital maintenance. We appreciate that the existing county sales tax receipts are then freed up to be the primary responsibility of this of the capital costs, the local capital for transitway projects. And getting to some of our additional kind of learnings, as we are moving forward with the Blue Line, we're developing a project decision board, which really supplants this ECCB, a much more engaged multi-agency group where Hennepin County, in this case for the Blue Line, will have primary voting responsibility as they did with the ECCB, but that their staff and that their oversight and that their fiduciary kind of role along with us is fully shared, fully understood, and then gets closer to the model that's been recommended, that funding follows accountability for these projects. Now, as previously stated by me in a number of these occasions, it's really important to kind of start with the fact that the delays and the cost overruns of this project stem from the unseen and unknown, although thoroughly warned, conditions of the Kenilworth corridor. There's no question that the soil conditions, the time it takes to construct, the ways to construct, the adjacency and the foundation kind of proximity and disruption along Sika has really been the primary reason why there's this additional time and of course the additional cost. Much of that is what we're experiencing today. Of course, the corridor protection wall, additional stations add to it, but I'm just kind of talking about this actual project is costing more because it always was going to cost more. It was under budgeted. It was had a suppressed funding budget, and it simply is not a $2 billion project. It is much closer to what we are projecting now, and we continue to face the risks of this Kenilworth corridor. There's just no question. And Met Council and the project partners, Hennepin County, and when it goes back to when this corridor was purchased in 1984, there's a long history which won't kind of relitigate. But once that path started, I am the first to admit that was an error in process, error in budgeting, and error in oversight. Given that, the project team has managed the complexity of what the project has become with its many changes, using I believe our best practices and frankly some very experienced and competent consultants to deliver the project. Project managed challenges posed by the proximity, as we described, of the Sika wall with a special engineering solution. We addressed the tunnel's unforeseen conditions through this settlement agreement. Settlement agreement we've talked a lot about, but it is essential because it provided for resequencing the work and a rebaseline of the schedule that allows two things. One, the project to keep going, and two, to actually mitigate the costs and the delays that would have happened had we not actually gone kind of outside the contract and renegotiate the contract to the betterment of the project and the betterment of costs. We actually have outside consultant opinions, but that is in the hundreds of millions of dollars, and actually at least 2 years. Even though there was a delay, it would have been much worse. settlement agreement also added the alternative dispute resolution process, as you've just heard, but it did something else which wasn't mentioned as much. It capped our liability and provided greater accountability on the schedule. So yes, it was important to have that in a contract. We now have those elements. As change orders occur, I'm actually, and as a appointed fiduciary, I have gone deeply into understanding the level of expertise we have in evaluating change orders and a robust process for evaluating those change orders. I rely on the MnDOT peer review that evaluated the experts, the expertise, and the process of looking at each change order. So we're not paying for anything that we shouldn't be paying for. And MnDOT says that is an efficient, effective, and an appropriate process to evaluate change orders. No, it doesn't follow, and absolutely, we always are looking for ways to improve our documentation, but there is a document for each change order. And I think there was clearly miscommunications for having broad requests for information and allowing 6,000 emails. I can't defend that. That isn't appropriate. But in terms of managing the project, we have a far more focused and a far more robust process to ensure that we're doing it the right way. So in every respect, and through this process, has been reviewed, audited, and great oversight by the Federal Transportation Administration. And in my own fiduciary role, I've actually talked to senior staff, to the deputy administrators, to the regional administrators, and the administrator herself from FTA asking, are we doing the right job? Do we have a competent project team? Are we dropping the ball? Is there anything that I should know as an appointed official that we should be careful about? And they said, you have some of the best project teams that we've seen around the country. Sadly, your cost overruns and some of the issues that associated with these mega projects are far more common over the past few years. And we've seen it in a number of different locations. Sadly, we're not alone. And there are some that have actually stopped projects, which becomes incredibly expensive, both in Baltimore and now in Hawaii. These are great kind of examples of projects which cost billions of dollars more, not just hundreds of millions. And so we know that some of the work we're doing, and I won't go into depth on the non-conforming work, but Curry building is a good example. That is an actual case that is under investigation, and the work around that area continues to this day. We have not kept any, nor have we agreed to pay any additional amounts to the contractor. That is something that needs to be resolved. But as they say, it's hard to fix the plane while you're flying it. There's a lot of things going on as we are building this project. The worst thing we could do is to delay this project anymore, to keep it on track and to keep our minds and fiduciary roles and our project management practice focused on delivering it in a cost-effective way. So I could go on, and I'm really open to along with Nick to answer your questions. I will conclude by acknowledging that, again, we have learned a lot. We are open and interested and listen to the legislative auditor's advice, recommendations, as well as those from MnDOT, those from we learned from our many outside national experts. But I have to say, I'm pleased that the project is progressing. We've worked through some very difficult situations, I believe, in ways that have mitigated costs for taxpayers. As an appointee of the governor, who has talked to me on a number of occasions about this project, are we doing everything we can do to deliver it efficiently, at the least expense, and as quickly as possible? And I have to assure you, from I have seen, and I've gone into deep detail, along with Council Member Barber, who is chair of the Transportation Committee, the other members of the ECCB. We've gotten in, not just with my steel-toed boots walking in the tunnel, but actual meetings and going through each kind of action. I should say, when an action comes before the ECCB, there's a lot of conversation and direct analysis that we go through with staff prior to a meeting, which isn't always seen, but should be understood to be there. So I expect that we will have the best outcome for the taxpayers, although this project is more expensive on a per mile basis. It is competitive. And given the $2 billion of development that's already taking place, has already provided a value for our region, and we expect to have more so in the future. So thank you very much.
So we got several questions. Senator Dibble and then Representative Quam.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Chair Zelli, couple of questions quickly. I'll have more later, but you know, to hear you, to read your letter and to hear you testify here. You know, you say things like we're not perfect and we're learning things and we're putting new things in place, et cetera. None of that is reflected in the official response. The official response is not really a response, it's a rebuttal, the point by point rebuttal of every point that the legislative auditor raises. So I'll just ask the general question because I have some specific questions, but maybe I'll just give you the opportunity. Is there anything in the legislative auditor's report that you find credible, that is a critique and a criticism that the Met Council can view as helpful, to take to heart, provide guidance, to provide some indication of ways in which the Met Council can change its practices, its ability to take in criticism, critique, oversight, and operationalize those observations from external to the organization.
Chair Zelli.
Mr. Chair, Senator Dibble, absolutely. I think that some of the recommendations about having some of the elements that we've now negotiated into this contract to be in the contract at the very beginning. I've heard that loud and clear. Having a much better and more robust simplified documentation. We need to continue to improve how we document, how that's organized. And that's certainly taken to heart. I think the areas of cost estimating is something they've pointed out and we've learned from, and we acknowledge that we have worked and now we are following a different practice that we had initially, and part of that is due to the legislative auditors recommendations and observations. I think the process of the fact that funding should follow accountability, that's been made a number of times. We actually think that makes a lot of sense. We're kind of for whatever reason, in a bizarre structure where we're held financially accountable without the resources to back that up. And I think that the idea of project governance itself, which we're responding with this project-based kind of sharing entity, that comes in part from the OLA's observations and recommendations. I've said, and maybe you're out of the room, that we're far from perfect, but we also take a lot of these recommendations to heart. I think when it comes to the actual review and analysis that we've had with experts on change orders, I just think it's important to point out that from what we've seen and from the work that we've done with our consultants and our kind of robust process, that you should know that we're not paying for something that didn't happen. We're not paying for a DBE when a DBE wasn't there. You know, and so I just want to assure you that some of this has taken the scrutiny of all the policymakers and others when they've been observed, to second guess, to make sure that we are following what we know can be the best practice in the construction of large mega projects, which are a special animal by itself. And I also would suggest that some of the processes that we've learned to improve have worked well in the Central Corridor, worked well in some of the other projects we've had, but they didn't work well here. And I think it goes back to the initial scoping and some of the points that you've made that should never have been in that corridor with this kind of process. So we've learned from the OLA, we're very open to those observations, but we've also learned from the project itself and from other outsiders.
So just to give a little timeline here, so I'll go to Senator Dibble, and then we have Representative Quam, Representative Hornstein, Senator Karan, and Representative Jacob, and I would like to adjourn at about 11:30. So Senator Dip.
Thanks. Well, I appreciate those comments. I'll just point out for the record, Mr. Chair, none of that is reflected in the response. The response is a point by point rebuttal, goes into great detail, and doesn't just rebut the points, every point that the legislative auditor raises, impugns the ability and the of the OLA itself to even be a credible entity, credible professionals to even provide the kind of analysis. And so I don't take a lot of confidence from the official on the record response that the Metropolitan Council provides to document, provide the proper documentation for this report. It's very unusual. Most executive branch agencies, which the Met Council kind of is, it's also kind of a local unit of government separate and apart from state government. Even when they feel stung by the findings of the legislative auditor, absorb the findings and provide an effective and effectual response and indicate how they will examine and analyze and make changes in response to the finding of the legislative auditor. This is a rebuttal in total, in sum, and I think it speaks to the culture of the agency, which is whenever a criticism or a suggestion or different information is provided, the posture is defensive and hostile, whether that come from Met Council members themselves. I have many reports from Met Council members who question the staff reports that come forward and are told that they can't actually change the direction of the staff report. Every single time Representative Hornstein and I've ever provided suggestions to the Met Council, it's been responded to with a defensive posture and or complete and total disinformation, citing FTA regulations and FTA rules where we find out immediately are untrue. So I would just advise the Met Council, you as the chair, the Met Council members, I'm not going to speak to the staff because they report to the commission, they report to you, and by extension to the governor and to ourselves as elected officials, to be more open to the kinds of things that people are concerned about, particularly those people who are representing with election certificates the public's interest. Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chair. Senator Bill, I have heard your feedback, and we will certainly take that to heart. I do think that it's important to the extent that we listen and are open to feedback, and we should be, and to the extent that our official response doesn't reflect that, it should. I do think, and I appreciate that the legislative auditor said that they are not construction or mega project experts, but we have construction and mega project experts who have given a different point of view. And so to the extent it sounds like a rebuttal, it is simply presenting the situation as we see it.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And wow, not overpaying and best teams. Why are we even here if any of that was true? The numbers and the data don't support that. This is not the first light rail project that your entity has been involved with. When I've done private sector project program management, we finish it project, we do a post-mortem and we figure out how we can do things better. And if all the other ones ran great and this one has so many issues, there obviously is some incongruity there. And the statement that you knew from the beginning that it was going to take longer and cost considerably more, how we as a legislature can justify including any of your estimates and projects and taking you at your word is just shocking. Very, very shocking. And the audit response in the real world, I've been on the receiving and the giving end of audits. If you're asked to show documentation and procedures and policies, etc., and you can't, you fail. If you don't follow the procedures you say that you have, you fail. But, real world, and pixie dust, well, I should go on and say there are the problems and issues that have been discovered and highlighted in this and previous audits. Are those being caused by bad procedures or incompetent personnel or a combination of both? That would be a question.
Chair Zeller.
Mr. Chair, Representative, when I stated that these costs were inevitable at the beginning of the project, I didn't say we knew. We should have known. We didn't, and we should, and we've changed a lot of our risk analysis, our transit advancement policy, the process for estimating in a very complex project, which and also the fact that this is occurring at other projects around the country speaks to the nature of these mega projects. We are not perfect. Can we improve our competency and procedures? Absolutely. I do not believe it is an issue of people being inept, nor corruption. The project should have been budgeted at the level more of what we recognize it is now. It should have been, because that's what it's going to cost. And it would have been better for us early on when this alignment or how the processes of maybe whether a tunnel should not have been built or some of those questions clearly were set in motion years ago. And we're not saying, I'm saying that that's a flaw and it should have been recognized. But I think given those set of circumstances, that the project team, not perfect, but have done a much more competent job than I think this body might be thinking, given the set of circumstances it faced.
Representative Quam.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And because we've heard and been informed that federal dollars were utilized in this project, and frankly, with those, there are federally required oversight and documentation requirements. And looking at the audit, I don't see how those were achieved by their guidelines. So you'll find that if there is a federal look, they won't be as nice and cordial as the legislative auditor. They actually think people need to be competent and do what they say or plan to do. Frankly, the portions of our population that require and depend upon transit deserve to have the projects and the activity around transit to be competent, to be thought out well, so that there's a confidence that's lacking if you have all these issues when you're building it. Is it going to be safe a couple of years down the line? Are there going to be other problems? There are trust issues that are popping up from different groups, whether they're the people in the community, in the neighborhood, that discover that their building might fall down. If you look at Austin and other locations in Rochester where they've had apartment complexes that have structurally failed and people have been killed, and that you don't have to go back more than a few weeks to see examples of that. If I was living along that route and hearing and seeing, I would be concerned. And what I've heard and seen from the Met Council in the reaction to an audit shows a lack of reality and the possibilities and the capabilities that we're needing. But we don't have 3, 4, 5 hours to go over the details So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, and
Chair Zelli.
Mr. Chair, Representative, I not only do I have oversight as chair of the Met Council, I live alongside that corridor. I spend many hours with the Sika residents, with that building, and with the engineers and the project team addressing the very issues that you would be concerned about. I can say with confidence that that building will be left in better shape than before this project ever started. And there is a very good process of communication with that resident association. I'm staying very close to them myself, as is the project team, weekly meetings with their engineers. It is incredibly close. It was incredibly disruptive. It's a very difficult situation, but I feel confident that we're doing everything we can. So that kind of examples that's happening in other parts of the country is not going to happen here in Minneapolis. And I can attest to the mood of every resident because they're my friends. I know them, they're my neighbors. They're mostly concerned now with some of the freight traffic that's coming through, with some of the safety issues associated with the operations. They understand that it's going to take longer. Once it's done, there's going to be bike paths that'll be better. But devil's in the details. I hear you, but those are ones where I feel that the importance of appreciating what's done well, being open to change and come with some humility that this is difficult, but that the project team that's there now is doing the job under heavy oversight and scrutiny by the FTA, who have told me and others that they're doing a good job given the set of circumstances they're facing. So that gives me more confidence.
So
See you in a few years.
we have Representative Hornstein, Senator Cran, and then Representative Jacob. So Representative Hornstein.
Thanks, Mr. Chair. I have a question related to the letter that you responded to along similar lines that Chair Dibble mentioned, but I just wanted to preface that my question with, one example of, our constituents, the people that Chair Dibble and I, represent, have been talking about this for over 10 years, warning about it, meeting after meeting after meeting. Some of the issues we're talking about it, and a case study of this, one I remember very clearly at the Kenwood Rec Center. I think it was 9 or 10 years ago. Senator Dibble and I had asked that time Governor Dayton to, slow down this process, stop it, so we could get a second opinion on whether this tunnel was necessary and whether we could move the freight. We got the second opinion from a consultant who was hired called Trans Systems, and Trans Systems said, yes, it is possible to do this project. And I don't want to relitigate all of that, but they did say it is possible to do this project without tunneling, having the freight in St. Louis Park. And so I think that's just an example of one of many where, I think Chair Dibble had mentioned that suggestions were made not just by constituents and elected officials, but even trusted consultants. But along those lines, in the second paragraph, you state that while we appreciate the OLA's attention to this matter, and this is related to the contracts, several reports recommendations don't align with FTA guidance, are not appropriate for a project this size. And this is the phrase that I'm concerned about that I'd like you to respond to. That again relates to the point I made and Chair Dibble made earlier. And in some instances could have contributed to additional delay. What does that mean exactly? Am I reading this correctly, that additional public scrutiny causes delay? What did you mean by that phrase? In some instances could have contributed to additional delay. Is it relate to the contracting issues? I would like you to maybe examine that further. I don't know. I think the way it's written is a bit confusing. In the second paragraph of your letter.
Mr. Chair and Representative Bernstein, I can't say that this is the language is as clear as it needed to be. It's not the question of public scrutiny being the cause of delay, but I defer to on this particular point to Nick Thompson.
Mr. Chair, Representative Hornstein, this I think was referring to recommendation to not proceed with a change order until you have a total, complete understanding of the schedule. And in particular around the work we did in the tunnel, we anticipated that if we did follow that recommendation, we would have added 374 days of delay, I think we said in our response, to start work. And so there's some steps where you want to continue the work to occur before you fully understand the schedule impact. And maybe we didn't word that correct, as clear as possible, but that was referencing about, do you wait to do the work, or do you keep going, have the work continue to go forward while you're negotiating either the price or the price plus the schedule? And that's referencing the part 1, part 2 change order system, which I believe is described in the report about how that works. So
Mr. Thompson, if you just state your name for
Yep.
the record.
Nick Thompson, Deputy General Manager, Capital Programs for Metro Transit.
Representative Hornstein.
Well, thank you for that clarification because, I think there have been instances in the past where, again, public processes have been, decisions have been made. I think, and I think there was reference to this earlier. Decisions are made, then there's a public hearing. And I think that is a concern that many of us have had over many years, and not just with the Met Council. A number of entities, public entities, decisions are made, then there's ostensibly a public process. And I hope that as we move forward, we can correct that situation. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Senator Grant.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Zelli, I was jotting down your amazing statements on how great everything is. Your corrective action plan, which you recently discovered in this project, the first of many large projects you've already incurred. You said that, well, you should have known it was going to cost, instead of 1.3 billion, we certainly are going to be at $3 billion by the time this is done in the time frame. There were hundreds of people in the Met Council under your jurisdiction and before you as well, so not everything is on you. The sole responsibility for every aspect of this project. We're talking, I think Senator Dibble and Representative Hornstein talked about the 10 years prior to engaging in construction, yet it's more like 20 years overall. And then you talked about a self-assessment. Discounted, right? You described what all you're going to do, right? All of the new changes. Not one recommendation was acknowledged of the legislative audit findings, but you laid them out, which are basically your core responsibilities in every aspect of your job of running the agency and the public transit system. I'm just somewhat amazed at, we should have known it. We knew it was going to cost more. Well, do we assume that for everything? This one took 20 years of planning. And one of your statements was, well, don't worry, we now have a new 6-month transit advancement project, and that's going to solve all the problems. You described, we're learning more every day. Well, thank you. That's what you're supposed to do. You have confidence in the documentation. I think the audit report indicates that's not true, or we don't believe so. And your lack of contrition, your lack of compliance with the legislative auditor, you should have been begging them and providing and guiding them. And then you even said I think you said, when Senator Dibble said, well, your rebuttal to every single issue doesn't reflect that. You said, well, I'm sorry. Did you read it before you signed it? I'm not sure. I mean, I'm really not sure, because your description of what is our corrective action and how we're going to believe and have trust moving forward is going to be very, very difficult. And then another statement you made was funding should follow accountability. It's extraordinary. What does that mean? There's been no accountability in this entire process. The decisions about a tunnel, no tunnel, whatever those were decisions that have consequences. They weren't made by this body. They were made by the people who spent 20 years in deciding the path and the opportunities and what are the risks. Those should all have been known and well-informed. And we should have been the most informed, and we weren't. Senator Dibble and Representative Hornstein sure as heck have been involved since day one on this thing at a detailed manner. And so I just find it extraordinarily difficult that your best practices and those things that we're going to move forward on. That we're supposed to believe in what you just said. It was an extraordinary self-congratulations about the great work you've done. And again, I know you've got great people working as well, but this is a 20-year project. We're now $3 billion. And we just laid out a whole network of public transportation expenditures. And we're supposed to trust your organization to deliver better and to be accountable when we've seen nothing in this project. And from the beginning of the awareness of what's the significant cost, there really has been very little change. And so to me, that's what I'm most upset about. And so I guess just for the heck of it, just so the public understands, right? I don't think anybody understands what $3 billion means, but why don't you just give us a little bit of how many hundreds of FTEs worked on this project prior to the construction decision, and how many since the post-construction, right, when you decided to go into the procurement and that process. Give people a little bit of scope of the number and size, not those of the contractor, what those FTEs are, but Met Council, you started 20+ years ago. How many hundreds of positions were there? Just give people a little bit of scope. We talk as if some of these things were just unknown. You had 20 years. And if you can't have a proper assessment and proper decision-making, even though I think you said the FTA said, we did a great job, we followed everything. You can follow everything to the letter of the law or the policies and rules and still be very wrong or very uninformed in making those decisions that have extraordinary consequences. And so why don't you just give the people, I'll leave it with that, just give the people a little snapshot of the hundreds and hundreds of employees that worked on this prior to even the beginning of the construction, and then post-construction just on Southwest Light Rail. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair Zelley.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, Senator. To clarify, this project began construction at a $2 billion cost figure, and it has clearly increased for the reasons I've cited. And I come with great humility, not self-congratulations, but to simply report not the flawlessness of the project, but the competence of the team that is working through difficult issues, particularly over the past, which is what I'm reporting on, the actions we've taken over the past 2 years and some even more recently. In terms of the number of people who worked on this project, it is hundreds. Nick is failing me here. Any idea how many?
Mr. Thompson.
Mr. Chair, Senator, I can talk about how many are currently working on it, but since the project that started in 1984, the number of different individuals and different entities, I wouldn't want to guess at that number.
We can certainly gather that information and report back to you. It has been a long period of time, and I would also say the other projects that have been delivered by Met Council have much better track record in terms of budget and timing. But there were actually more change orders on the Central Corridor than there are on this project. That came on time, on budget. But this is a particularly big, complex. The tunnel is clearly the biggest issue, but it also has flyovers, wetlands, other tunnels, co-location with freight rail. It has almost every kind of element that can cause risk to a project. And we are far from flawless. We did not anticipate, and we should have early in the phases of this planning.
Mr. Chair,
Senator Grant.
just a quick, you've been the sole governing body of this project over 20 years. It's not the first time you've had the assessment of that looking back to 98. It's unfortunate you can't answer the basic question. To provide that information after the fact, you're here at a hearing today to talk about this process, and that information should have been. You did say you could give us the number of those that are working on it today. Please give us at least since the construction decision was made, the closest time period in which you are managing the process. How many hundreds of people are there?
Mr. Johnson.
Mr. Chair, Senator, so in terms of the project oversight, which is essentially the organizational chart for it, there's over 60 employees that are both consultants that are in the project office, Met Council employees, Hennepin County employees, MnDOT employees. That's essentially the team, the project office team. Then we have, of course, the contractor and the engineer of record. They have their own teams. Contractor, I believe, laborers have I think the last number was over 7,000 different labor in the workforce have been in the construction phase of this project that have taken home a paycheck related to the project. So the project oversight is the smaller number of that. The laborers and construction contractors are quite a large number.
So I want to make sure we get Representative Jacob in, and then I'm going to go to Hornstein and Dibble. So Representative Jacob.
Thank you. Thank you to the auditor here for the work on this. What we're dealing with here today. So just as a new legislator, a couple of just really basic, straightforward questions for Mr. Zelli here, so I can go back to my district with clear answers. Give me the original projected price, the original projected completion date, and the current projected price and the current projected completion date. Probably everyone else who's been here 20 years already knows that.
Chair Zelli.
Mr. Chair, Representative Jacob, the original completion date with the start of construction was 2023 this year. And the budget was approximately $2 billion. 2 years ago, we had a new forecast that's 2.75 billion roughly, and the completion date was 2027.
Representative Jacob.
Is the 2.75, is that still an accurate number? Are you going to be asking for more time and more money? Where are you at?
Chair Zelli.
Mr. Chair, Representative, we are still in the riskiest area of construction, completing the Kenilworth Tunnel. So I think that there is possibilities of additional costs, and also considering the proximity and the complications along Sika. But we have no evidence now to know what that would be. I think over the next 2 years, we'll get through this most riskiest and part of the project.
Representative Jacob.
So the answer that you just gave you're saying you don't know for sure about the time, but you're saying that the 2.75 billion is not going to cover it. Do you have a number you can give me? A projected cost?
Mr. Thompson.
Mr. Thompson, you can answer.
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Representative, great question. So we have not changed from that number yet on that budget. We now enter a process with FTA to update the project budget by the end of January of next year, or so this upcoming January. So that will be the next time if there is a change in a budget, which we are not forecasting yet. If there will be, that would be the next update to the budget. And the 2027 opening date is still the date that we have. But again, as the chair mentioned, we're in the riskiest part of the project. We remain. Project itself is 75% complete. And prior to that new budget revision and update in January, we'll have accomplished 6 more months of work and gotten through a lot more of the risk. And so our next chance, we'll look at that number, and the opening date would be January of 2024.
Representative Jacob, last question.
Sure. And maybe just a bit more of a statement, and I'll let you move on. But so you had stated that, Mr. Zelli, that the 2 billion was an entirely unbudgeted or under budgeted number to begin with. And it's just really hard to build trust within the community when if you felt as though that was an under budgeted number to begin with, the community should have had a better grip on what the project was actually going to cost. And that certainly might have had an impact on whether the project would have went forward at all. So to under budget to begin with in order to get the community to come on board and support the project and then say that that number was under budgeted, it just doesn't bode well for us as a government. I mean, we want complete transparency. We want the community to know exactly what we're doing. So it just doesn't feel good to bring forward numbers that probably aren't actual and factual to begin with. So more of a statement here at the end, but thank you.
Mr. Chair, Representative,
Chair Zally.
just to be clear, in hindsight, it is my opinion that that was under budgeted. It should have been more. At the time, our engineer of record and all the design engineers of the project gave that number as a solid number. It in retrospect, and hindsight's everything, it was inadequate. That is only in hindsight years later.
Senator Dibble, close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll just note for the record that this issue of escalating costs goes back to prior to 2010, and it has a lot to do with what Chair Zally said, that it was going to be the Kenilworth corridor come hell or high water starting back in 1984, and the agency, in conversation with Hennepin County, they're partially responsible as well, was not going to be dissuaded by any expense and any evidence, anything coming external to the agency that might have caused it to step back and take a fresh look. And I'm looking at, going back to 2010, 1.25 billion, 2011, it goes up to almost 4, 2013, 1.5, and on it goes, literally every few months, escalating by a few $100 million. And now we're at 2.7, and we're probably going to top out at over 3 billion. All, kind of matters that no one could have known about. And, anyways, so I made my point. I wanted to just kind of conclude by bringing an episode from recent history as an object lesson. And what I'm going to talk about is going to be somewhat bewildering to the Met Council, because they're going to think, oh, we were highly responsive to the community and the issues it raised, but it never should have gotten to this point, is the point that I'm making. And that has to do with this issue of dealing with all of the people that were converging on downtown last weekend for the Taylor Swift concert and for the Pride festivities. Tens of thousands of people. And the initial response from the Met Council was, we have a deficiency of operators. We conclude our service, sometime, around midnight, 11:30 midnight. We are just simply not going to be able to transport people out of downtown after the concert lets out. And, then, Representative Hornstein and I, the mayor, others said, we got to figure this out. This is not an acceptable response. And to the credit of the chair, they figured it out. Service was provided. It never should have been a news item. We didn't hear from a single Met Council member through this entire process. If in fact the Met Council, I'll just lay my card on the table. If the Met Council was governed by an entity that felt a high level of exposure and responsiveness to the public it served, this would have been a problem that would have been dealt with way upstream, and it would have been solved. And the fact that people were up in arms and in a state of panic, and heroic efforts need to be mounted to solve the problem, tells us that there's something about this agency that allows it to think it's okay to say in the public, you're on your own, tens of thousands of people. Something is wrong with a culture that allows for that. I said to the chair, and I bet you if the council member were elective, they would have said, I'll learn how to drive a train. You should learn how to drive. We're all going to learn how to drive trains. We're going to solve this problem. This is not going to be an issue. This is not going to end up in the newspapers. We're going to do our public duty. A lot of what we're talking about here, the misfeasance, the malfeasance, the nonfeasance that's woven throughout this document has to do with a culture in which there's a complete lack of sensitivity and responsiveness and attunement to the public responsibility and the public duties that it has. And I'll just leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Chair Zelli.
Mr. Chair, Senator Dibble, point well taken. It was inappropriate messaging to say that the Met Transit wouldn't be providing service because clearly we did, and I believe there was apprehension about our operator shortage. I'm proud of the service we provided, and we did have a number of extra operators, and it worked out. It should never have been given up to the point of panic, and that's a point well taken.
Representative Hornstein.
Thank you. I think the points were made, and I appreciate this hearing and you're including me, even though I'm not a member of the commission. So thank you so much, Mr. Chair.
You know, Chair Zelli, we deal with a lot of laws here, but the one that's always there that we can't change is Murphy's. And we should prepare for it. And all along here, it seems like we ignore it. Somebody's ignored it. And then it's a surprise. So I think Senator Dibble and, you know, you've had a bipartisan discussion here. Something's wrong. And we're dealing with billions of dollars and we're trusting you to do a lot more. So something's got to change somehow. You know, not just on this project, but we're relying on you to do a lot. So, you know, I think having discussions with the legislators and, you know, with the appointed council members and getting out into the community and picking up the tremors before they happen here is a good preventive mechanism. And I'd encourage you and the folks on the council and the staff to be doing that. But for right now, we have to find some way of assuring that this is going to work. This particular thing is going to work and not be perpetual machine that just keeps going on with more cost. It needs to get done, but it also needs to get done responsibly. And as I mentioned before, we can't manage by audit. You know, the auditor staff are here to work for the people, working for the elected legislators, you know, to be their voice and do what we can't do. But this has, you know, been one of several. And that's our responsibility, is to make sure that we're providing that transparency. So I'd encourage you to keep working with us on that. And we don't want to keep having to have these audits, but I think we will be, because it's big ticket items. And we just appropriated a lot of money to a lot of things, and we need to make sure that it's spent well for the people of Minnesota.